The Shakespeare CF50A. Want to learn how to service this yourself so you don't have to pay someone else to do it? Well, let's go. Now let's go ahead and pull up a schematic for this just so we have the exploded view of it, but also to have part numbers in case we need to order anything. In this case, this is a brand new reel, so there's nothing to be replaced. It's in good working order. Now we're going to start by removing the drag knob, as you see me backing this up or turning it counterclockwise so we can get that spool off. But next I'm going to go ahead and remove the handle. And this is a pass-through handle, and the way you can tell that is by looking at the other side, that knob right there. If you turn that handle, you'll see that knob turn as well. However, sometimes you will have a screw under that cap, so it's always a good practice to remove the cap to see what's under there and to ensure that it is indeed a pass-through handle. Now when I take this off, you'll see that little washer there. Just note that it's there and don't lose it. Now we can pull this handle out, and we're going to go ahead and start by working on the spool. Now let's go ahead and remove the drags first, and you'll see me take the screwdriver, stick it inside the gap that's around that ring, push in and up, but also keep my left hand over the ring so it doesn't go shooting somewhere. Now we're going to pull these drag washers out just so we can see them, and notice that they are felt drag washers, but that they're also dry. Moving on, we're going to go ahead and flip this spool over just to look at the click assembly so we can remove it. I'm going to get that click tongue out of there by undoing that screw. Now what I'm going to point out here is there is an orientation to this click tongue assembly, so we want to see that before we pull anything out of there, just so we know how that goes back in. Now note that that click tongue is resting over a post inside the spool, and so is the other end of that click spring. This is what I'm pointing out here now, on that side for the click tongue and for the other side for the click spring. Now let's go ahead and flip the spool back over so we can work on the drag washers. And again, don't forget these washers here are dry, and I don't like to run these felt washers dry, so I'm going to add some Speedex reel oil to these. You can use whatever oil you have, just as long as it's fishing reel oil should work. Now note that I'm oiling the inner ring right there, but not the entire surface area of that drag washer. And that's because when you put those drag washers in, when you compress them with the drag knob, it'll spread that oil out. Now I did put the metal keyed washer above it, as you can see there, and now I'm oiling the second felt drag washer. But when we come to the next metal washer, we'll see that that has two little ears on it. Those ears will fit into those grooves that we see on the spool. There's one there and one right there. You just slide right down through it. And then we'll just move on to the final drag washer. Now we'll work on the last drag washer. Note that when I put that metal washer above it, it's also a keyed washer, so we have a keyed metal, aired metal, and then a keyed metal. Now when I put this ring in, we'll stick one end down into the channel that's inside that spool, and then take our finger and work it around, pushing in and down as we go. Sometimes what happens is when you put that in, it doesn't sit into groove properly, so we'll have to take our screwdriver and just kind of work and play with it to get into the groove that you'll see when you put that retaining ring inside there. Now back to the clicker assembly, we're going to take that click tongue. Notice there's a little tab in the bottom that's going to go inside that opening that's inside the spool. And there's a sloped end to that click tongue that'll be facing up toward you. We're going to go ahead and screw that in. Then when we get to the click spring, that's going to enter the click tongue from the top. So we'll have that opening that's on the click spring going down through it. Now we're going to take a pick tool or something sharp, stick it inside the hole on that click spring and pull it over the other post. Sometimes you get it the first try, sometimes you have to work at it. And that's set. Now going forward, it is assumed I'll be cleaning and relubing the reel, so here are some things I utilize to facilitate that. So here's what I'd use to clean the reel. I would use some Corrosion X to spray on those dried up grease spots so it can help break that down. Use some Q-tips, paper towels, and a toothbrush to help dislodge those particles. Now to re-lube the reel, I would simply use what you saw earlier in the SpeedX as the oil, and I would use pen reel grease to grease the metal parts. And links to all these plus some additional tools that I use can be found in the video description. Now let's go ahead and work on the rotor first. We're going to work on the line roller and that bail assembly. To do that, we're going to go ahead and remove the ratchet and that washer you see on top right there. Next is going to be that little lock screw, that silver piece. We're going to undo that and then remove that gold nut that you see. That gold nut will turn clockwise to remove, so turning right to loosen it. And then to get that rotor off, we're going to go ahead and just wiggle that as we pull up. Now for the bail wire, we're going to remove this side, in my consideration the non-load side, also call it the pivot side. Just going to pull that off and then head on over to the bail arm side, where I'm going to put my thumb and my index finger to support that bail arm as I undo that screw. Note both screws I removed are the same size, so no need to worry if you mix those up. Now to get that bail arm off, we're going to rock up gently to not disturb that spring that's under load under there, and slowly lift upwards at that angle that you saw me do, just to release the load. Now we can undo that cover by undoing that screw there to expose what's underneath. And what we see here is that we have the bail spring assembly, the holder, the spring, and the pivot arm. Plus we also have that trip arm under there. Notice there's one side longer than the other for that trip arm. To get this line roller separated, we're going to undo that screw there. And after we do that, we're going to expose a few things. One is that washer you see inside the bail arm. Having some difficulty getting it out, so we just left it in there. No need to worry taking it out if it doesn't come out. Next we have the line roller with two bushings in there. I'll use my handy dandy tool to pull that out and show you. There's one, and here's the other. One thing to note about this line roller is it slopes a certain way. So you have it sloping downward towards the bail arm, but also conversely sloping upwards towards the bail wire. That upward sloping section will be going that direction, just like that, when you reassemble it. Now I would grease inside there. A little bit of grease over those bushings. Some grease there and some grease or oil in that hole that I'm pointing at. I would also add some grease to that washer there and some grease around the pivot or that point on the bail arm, as well as that hole that you saw. Now I'm going to put everything back together with the screw, but I'm not going to screw it all the way down yet. I'm going to leave a little bit of play in this just in case I need it to make some sort of adjustment when we put everything together. Now definitely grease that trip arm, ensuring that the longer side is going facing down like I just did there. Now we're putting together the bail spring assembly. We'll see that pivot arm going inside that spring. I'll grease the pivot arm, but not usually the spring. Go inside the holder. You'll see on the holder there's two posts. One has a larger diameter than the other. That larger diameter will be going inside the hole that's on the rotor shown right there. That other smaller diameter hole will be going inside a hole that's on the cover itself, and I'll show you that in a second. Note that the spring assembly should be under that trip arm assembly, just as I showed you there. And we're going to make sure we secure that holder into the hole right there with the cover on top of it. Now I'll show you that hole in the cover that I was talking about earlier that will be going over the upper post or top post on that holder right there. Now we're going to go ahead and secure this, and I'm going to go pretty much all the way down with the screw because any little bit of leeway in this may cause that holder to slip out of place. But I am going to leave just a little bit of room for me to play with that spring if I need to make some sort of adjustment. I'm going to go ahead and take this bail arm so we can get that on top of the bail spring. We're going to stick that bail spring in that hole that I showed you right there. So that pivot arm right there will be going inside of that. Just stick it in the hole. And we're going to gently move that at an angle down over the post. So just like so, slowly move it down. You'll feel this pop into place. Right there, it just happened. And we're going to secure the bail arm with our fingers just so until we get that screw in place. Now once that's done, we're going to go ahead and snug the screw down for the bail cover, but let's make sure we don't go too tight because we don't want to crack that plate. Now what we've just done here is the trickiest part of putting this bail assembly together. Now what we have left is taking this end, putting it over that post, securing it with the screw, and then we're going to test the bail flip out. Because we do want to make sure that any work we've done to the reel, it works properly afterwards. There we go, and that looks good. Now we're going to go ahead and secure that line roller. And the reason we left that loose was because we may need to play with the bail wire, but we don't. All right, now if we look at the action of this dog, we'll see how that goes in and out. They have that spring on top that kind of actuates it or moves it. And it's interacting with the grooves that you see under this rotor right here. The serration that you see there is what that dog is interacting with to stop the reel from going backward. So again, that goes back and forth interacting with the ratchet under the rotor. Now you have this lever here that engages and disengages the anti-reverse. Now we can just take this, pull that straight up. Notice there's a washer under there. And now to remove this dog, we can take that screw right there out. Just gonna pull that straight up. And now we can pull those two screws out, but before I do that, we're going to turn this reel to the side and remove some screws on there. First, we'll start with that boot screw. And when we take that one off, we're going to reveal another screw that's under there. So we're gonna have a total of 4 screws to remove to get this side cover off. 1, 2, 3, and 4 right there. Now all these screws should be the same size, but we're just going to lay them out just to make sure that they are. It never hurts to double check because you would hate to put the wrong screw in the wrong hole. Alright, so let's go ahead and pull this off. This is proven to be a little bit difficult to get off, but there we go, it pops off. Now we have under there that block that you see me winding down, and I'm doing that so I can remove that screw to get the shaft out. Now we'll go ahead and pull that shaft out of there. Next I'm going to take the block out, and after that I'll remove the main gear. On this main gear you'll see that there's some washers. I'll show you that right here. Those are shims. Don't lose those. And now we can go ahead and pull that crosswind gear out. And if we notice, we have 2 bushings there. There's one on this side, which is the main housing, that right there. And there's also one in the side cover right there. They're both the same size, so they can go back in on either section. Now we're going to go ahead and remove that little metal piece you see me pointing at right there. I'm going to cover that up because that's a really tight spring that helps secure the lever for the enter reverse. So I'm just being real gentle here. There it goes, it just popped out. And we'll notice that that's how it looks. Now we can see how that lever just flops around because the spring is no longer there. I'm going to go ahead and pop these two screws out so I can remove the pinion stack. Now one thing to note here when we're pulling this out, notice I'm undoing that screw and I stop. That lever or the tab on that lever was in the way, so I had to move it out of the way to continue removing that screw. We could have done this in reverse where I removed that lever first, and then that wouldn't have been in the way. Now all we have on here is a bearing. And now to get that lever off, we're going to remove that screw that's right there. And then we're just going to go ahead and pull that up. Now we can pull that lever out and we're good. Take my pen grease and I would grease right there, under there, and in that channel. That's where the pinion stack goes through, or where the pinion goes through. Inside there where the pinion sits, right around there. I would probably add some oil around there, some oil in there and there, some grease inside there, and some grease around there where the crosswind goes, inside there where the bushing goes. Those are for the two bushings that I'm showing you. And some oil probably in those holes as well for the side cover. Now for the crosswind block, I'm going to add a decent amount of grease inside that channel right there, but I will grease the entire surface area. And I'll do the same thing for all of these metal pieces. The pinion stack, I will also include greasing the threads at the top right there. That's just so the rotor nut doesn't get frozen on there. So for the crosswind gear, I'm doing the same thing, greasing the teeth, but I am going to add a little extra grease around that post right there. Same sort of deal we're going to do for the main gear and for the back side, but I'm also going to add some grease inside that hole where the handle is going to go through. Same thing I can do for the handle. I can add some grease or some oil there and add some grease or oil inside that hole that receives the screw. We can now go ahead and oil right there or add grease, either one works. Oil there, and you can oil at the top right here. We're going to go to pull this thing out, expose what's under there, and you can grease or oil that. I'd probably add oil to it. Now we'll take our bushing and put that back in, and the reason I do that right away is because sometimes I forget to do it, and I don't want to have to remove all those pieces just to get that in. Now we're going to start with the stack at the top here. And the first thing we're going to put in is that lever. Now we can add oil or grease to this. In general I use grease, but this time I'm using oil because I'm adding oil to that hole where the screw is going to go. So I'm just going to continue adding oil to everything. I'm going to lay that in there looking just like that. And when we get to the little silver insert that's laying on the table right now, you will see there's a little tab sticking up right there. That little tab will be facing in toward the pinion stack. You don't want that facing away from it. And then you're going to push it down through until it fits through the lever. Now that's done. I'm pointing out that there's a stopper for the back side of this that helps it only go so far one way and so far the other way. Now we can go ahead and put the screw inside right there. Now as I'm screwing this in, please don't forget that thumbs up button if you're finding the information useful. It does help it spread amongst YouTube. The last piece of this assembly we have is that spring right there, but we're not going to put that in yet. Just showing you that I know it's still there. We haven't forgotten about it. We're going to start with the pinion stack first. I'm going to take that, put the bearing over it, And then we're going to go ahead and stick that in down through that hole right there, just so it gets seated properly. Make sure it goes all the way down. Now we can secure that with the 2 screws that we took out from earlier. All right, now let's go ahead and add some oil around right there where that dog will be sitting. Drop that on looking just like that. Now we want to make sure that that end of that dog right there is in front or behind, depending on how you're looking at it, that metal piece on the anti-reverse mechanism. You can see what I'm doing there. Let's go ahead and secure it with the screw. Now we can play with that lever just to show you, but we know in that position it stops the dog from working. In that other position, it lets the dog work freely. Let's go ahead and stick on this washer so we can get that actuator assembly set up and put on there. And when we get to that, we'll show just how it's supposed to look. It's coming around from the right side, just like that. Not from the left side, which would look something like this. That's a no-no. This is how it should be. Just like so. Now we can go ahead and drop that over the pinion gear, making sure to have the little opening on that metal piece go over that tab that's on the dog. Just like that right there. I'm just testing it out to make sure it works, and we can see that it does. Still working, we just disengaged the dog. Now on with the crosswind gear, put the post somewhere towards the bottom like that. Take this crosswind block, that little channel you see right there will be going over that post. Just like so. Now at this point is when we finally go ahead and put that spring back in. Now where we're going to do this is we're going to turn that lever so we have as much open space as possible, like we do right there. Take that spring, stick one end in looking like that, so it's just kind of laying flat at an angle or almost sideways. And then we're going to take our screwdriver and keep our finger over one side as I keep that lever up. Look at the position of my fingers there. I'm keeping the lever up with my thumb over that area, and that's because I want to squeeze the other end that's not in yet and push that down with my thumb, as you see me doing right there. You got to keep working at it until it falls in place, which we just saw that it did. And now everything is set up. Now we can get that shaft in. I'm going to go ahead and add some oil to it here, but you could also add grease. And that's just for where it interacts with the block. Just don't want anything getting frozen anywhere. So now we're going to slide that straight in, making sure that that block is in the right position towards the bottom. And look right there, you see one side of the shaft is cut in deeper than the other. That deeper cut will be facing up, looking just like that. I'm going to stick it in right there to about there, and then stick in the main gear before I continue on. Now that that's in, I'm going to go ahead and continue on with the shaft while supporting that block, going through the hole right there and securing it with the screw. Now after we get this screw secured, we're going to go ahead and add the bushing to the back side of that main gear before adding the side cover to it. There's the bushing. Don't forget we have those shims. Want to make sure they're still there. Stick that on, and then we're going to cover it up with the side cover and button it all down with the screws. Again, they're all the same size, so we don't need to worry about that part. But we're going to put them in slightly before snugging anything down. We want to get all 4 of them in there. And the reason we do that is because sometimes when you put these screws in, if you tighten one end down, it stops the positioning of the side cover for another section of it. So that's why you do that. Now we're just going to go ahead and snug everything down because they're all in there. Now after we get all these screws nailed down, we're going to go ahead and add the rub guard to the bottom. But if you look at the rub guard, there's a little point right there that's going to stick inside that receiving hole. So we'll start with that end first, looking like that, and then rocking it down and securing it with the screw. Don't go too snug on this either because you don't want to crack that plate. But now that that's set, we're going to go ahead and add the rotor on there. Note that the pinion and that receiving hole on the rotor are keyed. So when you stick it on there, you're going to want to go back and forth until it falls in place, just like that did. Now we'll go ahead and secure it with the nut. Don't forget, we're going to go left to tighten on this one. And basically we want to line that nut up with one of the flat sides facing one of those holes right there. And then we're going to go ahead and secure it with the lock screw. Now we can take this click ratchet, stick that back on there. That's keyed, so just kind of rotate until it falls in place. And add that spacing washer right there. Now we're going to go ahead and get this handle in there. This is keyed, so make sure you rotate that until it falls in place through the main gear. And for this thumb screw, we're going to go ahead and hand tighten this, but we are going to snug it down. Just about there is good. Test it out, make sure it's feeling good, which it looks like it is. And I want to say